My name is Ed Moore. I'm married. I have 2 children, 2 sons. I live in San Clemente. I spent 6 years in the Marine Corps, and the squadron that I was in was HMM 364, the Purple Foxes. At the time, it wasn't the Purple Foxes. We were part of an operation called Operation Shufly that began in the early 60s, and our squadron went over in 1964. A little history about myself. My family, I had 1 sister and 4 brothers. We lived in a 2-bedroom or a 1-bedroom home in Delaware. I worked on the farm in the summer times. I saved all my money. I got $12 a week as I worked. Saved all my money. I had enough money to go to college. I went to college for 2 years. At the end of 2 years, I had run out of money, so there was nothing else to do. And John Wayne was my favorite movie star, so I thought I'd join the Marine Corps. That I did. And when I got down to Parris Island, I thought I had made a great big mistake. My drill instructor was a man by the name of Medvecki, and when he told us who he was and what he expected out of us, I was absolutely stunned. Shortly after I began our training at boot camp at Parris Island, I took tests to go to the flight training program. I passed them all, and I thought I was going to go to flight training. However, I wasn't accepted at that time, but I didn't know. So they sent me over to a battalion at Parris Island to await orders to find out what they were going to do with me. So they decided to send me to a school called, what I called the Remington Raiders. I became an office clerk. And that, after I finished that training, I went to NAS Glenview. I was up there 1 year, and I finally went to my CEO and I said, you know, I passed the test to go to flight training. I want to go to flight training. The colonel's name was a man by the name E.P. Hartsock. Same initials as my first 2, E.P. He says, well, I'm going to Washington this weekend, and I have a member, a good friend that's a member on the board of the selection committee. I'll find out why you weren't sent to flight training. So he goes over for the weekend. I had the whole weekend to wait to find out whether I was going to go or not. He came in on Monday morning. He said, PFC Moore, come with me. He says, I went into his office. He says, I have some good news and I have some bad news. He says, you've been accepted into the flight training program. I said, well, what could be the bad news? He says, you have to leave immediately. And it was over the Christmas holidays, so I had to go right on down to Pensacola. And I found out why they didn't accept me. Well, my grades were so poor that they didn't think I could make it through. So when I got down there, I took a test, a pre-math test they give all pilots when they come in. I got a 16 on the math. The instructor said, how did you ever get in this program? I said, well, I dive bombed the math section, and it was divine intervention, I think. I owe everything that I am to the Marine Corps. After 2 weeks of a school that they gave us a training to improve our math, I improved it to a score of 68. After that, the instructor said, I'll go to the academic director and see if I could help you through. So in that time, he said he would give me an extra week of instruction, he's sure I'd make it through. And I did. I never flunked another course in flight training afterward. This was in January of '61. I got my wings in October of '62. Right after I got my wings and I made my first salute to the first gunny who stood outside the door waiting for his dollar, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis. But I had orders to Santa Ana, my dream station, out in California, Tustin Air Base. So I transferred out to Tustin. Awaiting, the base was empty. Everybody was in Florida. And they were getting ready to go aboard ship, and the Cuban crisis, and I thought there was going to be a war. And I thought, oh my God, here I just got my commission. I'm going to get killed in the first month of my commission. Because they told us what the reserves were going to be like after the first invasion or first wave went in. And I thought I wasn't going to make it. Anyway, they both backed down, Khrushchev and Kennedy, and it became a no-brainer. It was all over. Their ships turned around, took the missiles back. Then, shortly afterward, I went to check in at the base at Tustin, big base at the hangars there, and I went over to the group, and I got to pick my squadron. And the squadron, there was, they gave a whole listing of all the people that were in the squadrons, from the colonel, who was a Colonel Janelle was his name when I first checked in, but I knew a few of the guys, the lieutenants that were in the squadron. So I said, this is the squadron I wanted to belong to, and it was HMM 364. Shortly after the joining the squadron, Colonel John Lavoie, he took over for the squadron for Colonel Janelle. And a little bit of history about Colonel Lavoie: was the outstanding Marine. He had a brother that was a priest. He had two sisters that was a nun. He had a vision with the Lord. He served in World War II. He served in Korea. And then he served, of course, with our squadron in Vietnam. Never had a scratch. And I all attribute that to the people that were praying for him. So every time I flew with him, I knew I was going to be okay. He's 93 years old. He lives in Reno, and I still have contact with him. I have a very interesting story to tell about him. When I wrote a book, it's called Out of Da Nang, and I give 10% of the proceeds to wounded warriors at Camp Pendleton. And so I made a hard copy of the book for the colonel. And I went up to him to Reno, where he lives, and there was another pilot that lived there by the name of Jim Nugent. And he said, you come up and I'll invite Colonel Lavoie over for dinner and he won't know you're coming. So prior to that, I had asked Colonel Lavoie where I could get all my records from the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps wrote me back a letter saying that they would give me all my records. Did I want them bridged or unabridged? I said, I want to know the truth. Send me everything. So they sent me my records. So when I got up to Colonel Lavoie's, or up to Jim Nugent, who was throwing this dinner party for Colonel Lavoie, in walked the colonel. I had all the information on myself to memory, and the colonel came in, I gave him the book, and he was very shocked and surprised. And then I said, you know, Colonel, I said, you told me I could get my records from the Marine Corps, and I got them. I said, now, I want to ask you about a fitness report you wrote on me. And he just sat there, he was stunned, you know. Of course he couldn't remember. And he had written thousands of fitness reports on people. And then I wanted to thank him for recommending me for jets. But it was wonderful. But getting back to the squadron and the time that he served with us, or I served with him under his command, we were at Santa Ana for about 1 year. Intensive training. We had a lot of junior lieutenants in the squadron, and we had a lot of transition pilots coming from jets over to helicopters. And those jet jockeys, they thought it was a downgrade to them, but they had a hard time transitioning into those helicopters. And they had a lot of respect for helicopters after they came over in the transition. After about a year of this intensive training, doing everything from rough aerial landings to you name it, we did it. And working with troops out of Camp Pendleton, working off the carriers, night carriers, day carriers, we went over to, we got orders to Vietnam. I thought, all the troops went over on the ship, and all the officers flew over, and we flew through Anchorage. We got the better steal of the deal. You know, we flew to Anchorage on Continental Airlines, then down to Iwakuni in Japan, and we did a transition period, I guess, just to acclimate ourselves to the new climate and the new time zone. And President Kennedy had been killed at that time. And then we all joined up back at the air base at Okinawa, Tokima. And they told us to all put our stuff in foot lockers and just take some clothes and some, they issued us some combat uniforms and whatnot, and we were off to Da Nang and C-130s. We got to Da Nang, and the next day we were flying missions with the ARVNs, the Marines, their Army troopers, and we did daily missions throughout our tour while we were there. And we also had a group that instructed the Vietnamese pilots or students and transitioning them into the H-34. We were there 6 months. We flew probably right around 10,000 hours of flight time. Most of us had around 100 missions, and we delivered a lot of supplies. I couldn't begin to tell you how much we did in supplies. We had some missions that were very dangerous and others that were just ordinary. I was out, I'll take an example. I was out on an ordinary milk run, and I had just dropped off a bunch of supplies at this outpost, cattle and chickens and what. They didn't have refrigeration, so they kill the animals as they are going to eat them. So on the way home, I heard this mayday, mayday, mayday. And what it was, the sequence was that there were 2 Army guys that had found a bunch of EC or NVA or whatever in the open and around a riverbed, and they were having a good time shooting them up with rockets and whatnot. And one of them said, "I gotta go, I'm running low on fuel." And there was another one, he says, "Well, I have plenty of fuel and I have some more ammo, so I'm gonna stick around for a while, make a couple more passes, I'll join up with you." So his buddy took off. Then he got shot down, crashed in this riverbed, and that's when I heard this mayday, mayday, mayday. So I said, "What are your coordinates, where are you?" And he just happened to be the next valley over. So he said, I said, "Well, the Marines are coming to save your ass." So we went over there, picked them up in the riverbed. They were engaged over there with the enemy. They were tearing up that aircraft there, so just destroying everything they could. Then they got in our ship, and we took them to the closest outpost. Put a headset on them down from the crew chief, and we're talking to them. Asked them where they wanted to go. And they said, "Just drop us off at the closest outpost. We'll take it from there." So we did. And you know, I never got their names. I never got their outfit. And because I've written this book, at the end of my speeches when I go to the VFWs or the local chapters and stuff of the various organizations, I tell the story and I say, would there be by chance or just by luck one of you that I happened to pick up that day? And everybody that's in the Army says, "I'll buy you that beer anyway," because I always said, "You owe me a beer for saving your butts." But they all offered to save a beer. Go buy me a beer. After 6 months in country, they put us aboard ship and with a battalion of Marines. And up and down the coast we rode for I don't know how many days. It was just brutal, just riding up and down the coast. And we were supposed to, I guess, assume that, I assumed anyway, I didn't know what our particular mission was, but probably had something to do with the embassy, that if anything went down at the embassy, we would take the battalion of Marines to go in there and protect our embassy people. Then we went into Subic Bay, and we had a little stay there at Subic Bay. And after that, everybody got their orders. We were all right. I applied for a regular commission in front of the board there. I was picked up for a regular. And so at the end of the tour on ship, we went back to Okinawa. We were there in Okinawa, and I had been selected for regular. So then they sent me, not knowing that I wanted to fly A4s. I didn't want to stay in helicopters. I wanted to fly A4s. So they gave me orders to Pensacola, Florida as a flight instructor. I got down there, and I only had about a year left on my contract. I got down there, I was waiting for the commission to come in, the paperwork. When it came in, my CO of the detachment there at Pensacola called me over and said, "Come on over to your commission's here. I want you to resign one and sign up for the other." I said, "Well, I went over there." And it was interesting. I said, "If you give me A4s and transfer me from Pensacola to the RAG unit, I'll accept that commission." But prior to that, I had gone out to California, and I had gotten 2 jobs with airlines. So I had myself all set up for an airline if they didn't give me A4s. And they did. So they just wouldn't do it. They said, "No, you have your orders, sign the commission." and I didn't do it. And then I got out and I went to work for Western Airlines. I flew for Western for about 20 years when we merged with Delta. And then I flew by, everybody was merged in with the seniority according to number and date of hire. And I finished my career after 31 years of continuous service. I flew everything from the Electra, the 707, the 720, 730. I flew captain on a 737 for approximately 20 years. And I ended my career on a 75 and 76 in 1998. And as I said, everything I have, everything that the person I am, I owe to the Marine Corps. And I owe to Colonel Hartsock for going in there and asking why I hadn't been accepted and getting me accepted, and to that instructor who taught me in math, and I went from a 16 to a 68, and he had faith in me. So that's the way I'll end this interview.
Well, tell me, before you end the interview, tell me about your book.
Well, my book is...
Hold it up so I can see that, would you?
My book is called Out of Da Nang. It took me 2 years to write. My wife convinced me to do something like this. She said, why don't you write a book? And I said, well, I'm not an author. I don't know whether I could or not. So I did, and on the back of the book is my biography. And I have said that I would give 10% to Wounded Warriors, which I do. I go down there about quarterly, and I give 10% of what my sales are to the Wounded Warriors. Now I go directly to the Wounded Warriors at Camp Pendleton. And I get to meet the people down there. You get to meet some of the soldiers that are the Marines that are completely badly hurt and injured. And there's every penny that goes to Wounded Warriors West Direct is spent on Wounded Warriors Direct. If they have a dog, they can use the money for dog food, to care for their animals. They use the money for their transportation for their family to come and visit them. All the monies is used direct. If you give direct to Wounded Warriors West, you walk down there with a check, they take the check, they give you a check, and they say this is tax deductible, and it is. You can write it off. But the feeling that you have, I had one experience, one of the Wounded Warriors, his name was Cody, and he lived in Washington State. And I had lived in Washington when I first went to work for Western Airlines. And I walked up to him, you know, when I first, he was in the music room, just beating on these drums. And boy, he was quite a drummer. He had the cymbals and everything, and he saw me coming, and he pulled the hood up over his face and covered his face. And I walked over and asked him what his name was, and he was a Marine, and he lived in Washington. I said, Washington, D.C. or Washington State? He said, I lived in Washington State. And he was just peeking out through that hood. And I said, well, I lived up in Puyallup. I said, that's how I lived in Tacoma. You know, we got to talking, and he was very comfortable. And then we were talking about fishing and where I had lived in Puyallup and everything, and then finally he threw the hood back. And his face was horribly disfigured. And his jaw must have been broken because he had implants where they were putting teeth. They were going to put teeth in his mouth. And I looked him dead in the eye, and I just like he was just a normal person, and nothing was wrong. And we spoke, and we chatted for about 15, 20 minutes. I told him that the next time I come down, I'd stop in and see him, and I said, boy, you got quite the talent here playing these drums. You ought to be able to get in a band quite easily, play some gigs and make some money. He says, well, that's what I'm hoping. Well, I went back there. The last time I went back, the Marine Corps had discharged him and sent him home because there wasn't any more they could do for him there at Wounded Warriors West. So they figured the best mental health for him would be to go home, be with family, close to family and everything, and close to a hospital and where he could get treatment there.